The golden dawn stretched across Thunder Ridge Valley like molten honey, dripping over weathered fence posts and sleeping cattle. Inside the Rusty Spur diner, Marcus Deadeye Hawkins nursed a steaming cup of black coffee, his scarred hands betraying a past that the simple rancher's clothes couldn't quite conceal. 20 years of honest ranching had softened his gun calluses, but not his instincts, and those instincts were screaming that trouble was riding hard toward Thunder Ridge, carrying the stench of greed and violence with it. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The autumn wind whispered through Thunder Ridge Valley like an old friend sharing secrets, rustling the tall prairie grass and carrying the earthy scent of cattle and sage across Marcus Hawkins' sprawling ranch. The Rusty Spur diner's neon sign flickers in the pre-dawn light, casting intermittent red shadows across the worn wooden boards of its front porch, where the morning regulars would soon gather for Ruby's famous sourdough biscuits and strong coffee. Marcus sat in his usual corner booth, positioned where he could watch both the front entrance and the kitchen's swinging doors without seeming to pay attention to either. His weathered Stetson rested on the aged leather beside him, and his sun-darkened face bore the gentle lines of a man who'd spent 2 decades under the open sky, though deeper creases around his eyes hinted at harder years before that. Ruby Martinez, the diner's owner and Thunder Ridge's unofficial keeper of secrets, moved with quiet efficiency behind the counter. Her silver-streaked black hair was tied back with a faded blue bandana, and her dark eyes carried the wisdom of someone who'd seen enough of life to know when storms were brewing. She'd known Marcus since the day he'd ridden into town 20 years ago, a different man then, with harder eyes and a reputation that made most folks cross the street when they saw him coming. The aroma of fresh coffee and sizzling bacon filled the air, mingling with the lingering scent of pine sol from Ruby's early morning cleaning routine. Through the diner's windows, decorated with hand-painted thunderbirds and running horses, Marcus could see the first hints of dawn painting the eastern sky in shades of amber and rose. His ranch, Thunder Ridge Cattle Company, lay just beyond. The town's limits, its fence lines stretching toward the distant mountains like stitches holding the valley together. Old Tommy Two Fingers shuffled through the door, the bell's gentle chime announcing his arrival. His nickname came from an unfortunate incident with a stubborn mule 30 years ago, but he wore it like a badge of honor. The retired ranch hand made his way to the counter, his bow-legged gait speaking of decades in the saddle. Ruby already had his coffee poured before he settled onto his favorite stool, cream, no sugar, and hot enough to scald a lesser man's tongue. "Gonna be a hard winter," Tommy announced to no one in particular, his rheumy eyes fixed on the distant mountains. "Saw 3 rings around the moon last night, and my missing fingers are aching something fierce." He flexed his remaining digits as if to emphasize the point, the morning light catching the worn silver ring he'd never removed from his wedding finger, though his Mary had been gone these past 15 years. Marcus listened while appearing, not too, his attention caught by the unusual silence from the prairie. Normally, meadowlarks would be greeting the dawn with their liquid songs, but this morning they were conspicuously absent. In their place, a heavy stillness had settled over Thunder Ridge, the kind that usually preceded either a storm or trouble. Through the windows, he watched Doc Wilson's ancient Chevy pickup rattle past, heading out to the Henderson place where a mare was struggling with a breech birth. The veterinarian's dedication to the valley's animals matched Marcus's own, though the Doc's tools were more gentle than the ones Marcus had once relied upon. Ruby appeared at his table with a fresh pot of coffee, her movements carrying the same careful grace that had caught his attention all those years ago when he'd first walked into her diner, still carrying the dust and darkness of his former life. "Sky's wrong this morning," she said quietly, topping off his cup. Reminds me of the day before the Torres gang tried to take over the valley back in '82. Marcus nodded slightly, remembering the stories he'd heard about how Thunder Ridge had fought off those bandits before his time. The valley had always attracted a certain type, men who saw its rich grazing land and isolated location as an invitation to take what they wanted. Most learned quickly that the locals weren't as soft as they appeared, but every few years someone new would need to be taught that lesson again. The diner's old ceiling fan spun lazily overhead, its wooden blades casting rotating shadows across the worn floorboards. Through the kitchen's swinging doors, Marcus could hear Ruby's grandson Miguel preparing for the breakfast rush, the rhythmic sound of his knife against the cutting board adding another layer to the morning symphony. Sheriff Kate Rodriguez's patrol car cruised past, the local law enforcement's early morning rounds as regular as the sunrise. She'd been a badge for 15 years now, taking over from her father who'd served the valley for 30 years before her. Marcus respected her ability to handle most situations with words rather than force, though they both knew there were times when words weren't enough. The morning light strengthened, revealing the details of Thunder Ridge coming to life. Old Man Peterson unlocked his feed store with methodical precision, the same way he had 6 days a week for the past 30 years. Young Jimmy Carter delivered newspapers from his battered pickup truck, the morning editions landing with soft thuds on wooden porches. Mrs. Whitehorse swept the boardwalk in front of her trading post, her silver jewelry catching the light as she paused to study the strange stillness of the morning. Marcus's fingers brushed unconsciously against the smooth grip of the revolver hidden beneath his ranch jacket, a habit he'd never quite abandoned, despite 2 decades of peaceful ranching. The weapon was a reminder of his past life, when he'd been known as Deadeye Hawkins in 3 territories, and his name had been whispered with equal parts fear and respect in saloons from Texas to Montana. The silver star pinned to his gun belt remained hidden as well, a symbol of authority he'd earned long ago in darker times. Only 12 men had ever carried that particular badge, awarded by legendary lawman Jacob Iron Jack Morrison to his most trusted deputies. Fewer still had survived to retire with it, though Marcus sometimes wondered if anyone truly retired from that life. Ruby's movements behind the counter carried their own story. Like Marcus, she'd come to Thunder Ridge seeking a quieter life, though neither of them spoke much about their reasons why. He'd recognized in her the same careful grace he'd seen in others who'd learned to survive in hard places, where every movement had to serve a purpose, and mistakes usually came with permanent consequences. Through the diner's windows, Marcus noticed young Anna Whitehorse practicing her riding skills in the small corral behind her mother's trading post. The girl's dedication reminded him of simpler times, when his own skills had been focused on working cattle rather than handling a gun. The sound of hoofbeats carried across the morning air, a rhythm as natural to him as his own heartbeat. Sheriff Rodriguez parked her patrol car and entered the diner, the bell's chime announcing her arrival. Her badge caught the morning light as she nodded to the regulars, unaware that the quiet rancher in Ruby's corner booth had forgotten more about law enforcement than most would ever learn. She settled onto a stool at the counter, accepting a cup of coffee from Ruby with a grateful smile. The peaceful rhythm of Thunder Ridge's morning filled the rusty spur, like a familiar song, each patron adding their own note to the melody. The coffee in Marcus's cup had cooled to the perfect drinking temperature when the distant sound of powerful engines shattered the morning's tranquility. His hand stilled on the ceramic mug, practiced ears counting the approaching vehicles, 4, maybe 5, all moving too fast for local traffic. Ruby paused in her work, her eyes meeting Marcus's briefly, a shared understanding passing between them. They both recognized the sound of trouble approaching, though neither could have guessed how this morning would reshape the future of Thunder Ridge Valley forever. Through the painted windows, the sun cast long shadows across the worn wooden floor, and somewhere in the distance, a lone coyote's warning call pierced the morning air. Marcus's fingers traced the outline of his hidden holster, muscle memory. From a past he thought he'd left behind, stirring like a sleeping rattlesnake about to wake. The last 20 years had shaped Thunder Ridge Cattle Company into something Marcus Hawkins could be proud of. His prize, Hereford bulls, were sought after by ranchers across 3 states, their bloodlines carrying the strength and temperament that had made his operation one of the most respected in the territory. The morning sun illuminated the broad pastures, where his cattle grazed, their red and white coats catching the light like copper coins scattered across green velvet. Marcus stood at his kitchen window, savoring the last sip of Ruby's coffee he'd brought home in a weathered thermos. The ranch house, built with his own hands over 2 summers, stood as a testament to his new life. Solid pine beams and river rock foundation, every nail and board representing another day further from the man he used to be. Photos lined the walls, telling the story of 20 years of honest work, his first cattle auction, the completion of the North Pasture fence line, community gatherings where he'd slowly earned the trust of his neighbors. Through the window, he watched his ranch. Hens begin their morning routine. Young Bobby Three Hawks led his favorite mare from the stable, the half-Comanche cowboy's gentle way, with horses making him invaluable during calving season. Maria Delgado, who'd started as a temporary hand 5 years ago and proved herself indispensable, was already checking the irrigation lines in the east pasture, her border collie Cisco trotting faithfully beside her. The morning light caught the silver handle of Marcus's ranch knife, a gift from old Tommy Two Fingers on his 10th anniversary in the valley. The blade had skinned countless calves and cut miles of baling twine, its honest wear so different from the tools he'd once carried. His gun belt hung in a locked cabinet in his bedroom, taken out only during the yearly trip to maintain his skills at a hidden box canyon where no curious eyes could witness the deadly accuracy he'd never lost. A gentle breeze carried the scent of sage and morning dew through the open window, along with the distant lowing of cattle and the rhythmic squeak of the windmill that marked the ranch's northern boundary. The sound of hoofbeats drew his attention to the south pasture, where his prized bull, Thunder's Crown, led his herd to the morning's grazing. The massive animal's presence commanded respect, much like Marcus himself in his previous life, though. The bull's power was displayed openly rather than held in careful check. The ranch's ledger lay open on his desk, rows of careful figures documenting the honest prosperity he'd built. Next month's cattle auction in Green River would be crucial. He'd spent years developing his herd's bloodlines, and the prices his stock commanded helped support more than just his own spread. 3 smaller ranches in the valley depended on his bulls for breeding, their success intertwined with his in the way of small communities. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. A knock at the door announced the arrival of Jake Martinez, Ruby's youngest son, and Marcus's ranch foreman for the past 8 years. The young man had grown up watching Marcus transform the struggling ranch into a model operation, learning not just about cattle, but about the patient strength it took to build something lasting. Jake's quick mind and steady hands had earned him the position, though Marcus suspected Ruby had known all along that her boy would find his place here. "Morning, boss," Jake said, his boots clean but well-worn, spurs quiet in the way that marked an experienced horseman. Bobby spotted something strange up by the north fence line. Tracks from multiple vehicles, fresh from last night. Nobody should be up there this time of year. Marcus nodded, his mind already cataloguing the possibilities. The north pasture, bordered public land, its remote location making it attractive to those who preferred to operate unseen. 20 years ago, he would have checked his ammunition before investigating. Now, he reached for his binoculars instead, though the weight of the revolver at his hip provided silent reassurance. "We'll ride up together," he decided, reaching for his hat. "Have Maria keep an eye on the east herd. If there's trouble brewing, it'll likely come from multiple directions." The strategy came naturally, though he was careful to keep his tone casual. Jake was good at his job, but he'd never had to learn the kind of tactical thinking that had once kept Marcus alive. Outside, the morning had bloomed into the kind of day that reminded Marcus why he'd chosen this valley for his fresh start. The air was crisp with autumn's approach, carrying the promise of winter, but still holding summer's warmth. Cottonwoods along the creek shimmered silver and gold, their leaves whispering secrets to the wind. His boots left prints in the dew-dampened earth as he crossed to the stable, each step measured and purposeful. His stallion, Shadow, waited in his stall, the black horse's intelligence showing in his careful assessment of his owner's mood. Marcus had found him as a half-wild colt in the mountains, recognizing in the animal's fierce independence something of himself. It had taken months of patience to earn the horse's trust, each small victory a reminder that some battles were won through persistence rather than force. As he saddled Shadow, Marcus's hands moved with the smooth efficiency of long practice, checking each strap and buckle with the same attention to detail that had once been directed toward cleaning his weapons. The leather creaked softly, the sound mixing with the morning chorus of awakening birds and distant cattle. Through the stable doors, he could see Bobby and Jake preparing their own mounts, their movements carrying the easy confidence of men who spent more time in the saddle than on the ground. The weight of responsibility settled across his shoulders, like a familiar blanket as they rode out, his eyes automatically scanning the horizon for signs of trouble. The north pasture lay 2 miles distant, requiring them to cross the shallow ford where Wolf Creek meandered through his property. The water ran clear and cold, carrying the taste of mountain snow and the promise of good grazing for months to come. Marcus led them along the creek's winding path, choosing stealth over speed. Bobby rode slightly behind and to his left, while Jake took the right flank position, unconsciously following a formation Marcus had never taught them, but that came from years of working cattle together. The morning sun warmed their backs as they rode, casting long shadows ahead of them like scouts probing the way forward. Shadow's ears pricked forward suddenly, catching something beyond human hearing. Marcus raised his hand, signaling a halt with the same gesture he'd once used to command men in far different circumstances. The others reined in silently, their horses standing quiet in the way that spoke of careful training and trust between mountain rider. Ahead, the north fence line stretched like a black thread against the golden grass, marking the boundary between his land and the wild country beyond. Through his binoculars, Marcus could see the tracks Jake had mentioned, wide tire marks that spoke of heavy vehicles, their treads not matching any local ranch trucks he knew. More concerning were the signs that multiple people had moved on, foot along his fence line, their presence marked by crushed grass and scattered cigarette butts that no careful rancher would leave behind. "Bobby," Marcus said quietly, lowering the binoculars, "ride back and have Maria move the east herd to the home pasture. Jake, I want you to check the game cameras we set up last month. Don't approach if you see anyone, just observe and report. Back!" The orders came naturally, though he was careful to keep his tone appropriate for a rancher protecting his stock rather than a commander deploying forces. As his men rode out on their assigned tasks, Marcus studied the distant mountains that had sheltered him for 2 decades. Their snow-capped peaks stood eternal, unconcerned with the small dramas that played out in their shadows, yet something in their silent weight reminded him of lessons learned long ago. That peace was often simply the quiet moment before violence. and that a man's true character was revealed not in how he sought trouble, but in how he faced it when it found him. Thunder's crown's distinctive bellow echoed across the valley, the bull's deep voice carrying authority and warning in equal measure. Marcus turned Shadow toward home, his mind already planning defensive measures that he hoped wouldn't be needed. The revolver rode silent against his ribs, its weight both a comfort and a reminder of promises made to himself, to this valley, and to the memory of a younger man who'd once thought violence was the quickest path to justice. The morning had stretched toward noon, the sun now high enough to burn away the last traces of dew. As Marcus rode back toward the ranch house, he noted how the valley's peaceful routine continued, unaware of the tension building along its borders. A hawk circled lazily overhead, its shadow dancing across the grass like nature's own surveillance. Each beat of Shadow's hooves against the earth seemed to count down the moments until the peace he'd built here would be tested, one way or another. Back at the ranch house, Marcus checked his phone, a concession to modern times that still felt foreign in his calloused hands. 3 missed calls from Green River Auction House about next month's sale, and 1 from Sheriff Rodriguez. He'd call. Kate back later. Her father had been sheriff when Marcus first arrived, and she'd grown up watching him transform from an outsider into one of the valley's most respected ranchers. She understood the delicate balance of knowing when to ask questions and when to let sleeping dogs lie. The morning's discovery had stirred old instincts, but Marcus forced himself to maintain his routine. He spent the next hour reviewing breeding records in his office, a converted sunroom where morning light streamed through windows that offered clear views of both the main road and the approach from the north pasture. The careful documentation of bloodlines and birth dates was as far from his previous life as he could get, though he approached it with the same methodical attention to detail that had once been directed toward very different purposes. A worn photograph caught his eye, tucked between pages of cattle lineage records. It showed him with Iron Jack Morrison, taken the day he'd turned in his badge and chosen a different path. The legendary lawman's last words to him echoed across the years. "The hardest part of changing isn't learning new skills, son. It's remembering not to use the old ones." The sound of Bobby's horse returning at a gallop pulled Marcus from his memories. The young ranch hand's usually calm demeanor was shaken as he dismounted, his boots barely touching the ground before he was headed for the porch. Marcus met him at the door, reading urgency in every line of the man's body. "Found something else up by Wolf Creek Ford," Bobby reported, his voice steady despite his haste. "Fresh blood on the rocks, boss. Too much for a coyote to kill. And this," he held out a shell casing, its brass surface dull with a thin coating of creek mud. Marcus took it without touching the sides, another old habit surfacing unbidden. The caliber was familiar, .308 Winchester, favored by professionals who needed accuracy at range. A truck's engine announced Maria's arrival from the east pasture. She parked her battered Ford near the barn, her border collie leaping from the bed before the vehicle had fully stopped. The dog's hackles were raised, sensing the tension in the air. Maria approached at a controlled pace that told Marcus she had news she didn't want to share in front of the others. "The east herd's secured," she reported, then added more quietly, "Found tire tracks by the old mining road. Someone's been watching the property, boss. Multiple positions, all with good views of the cattle pens." Marcus absorbed the information with outward calm, though his mind was already shifting into patterns he hadn't used in 20 years. The tracks at the north fence line, the shell casing by the ford, observation posts near the cattle pens. This wasn't random trouble. This was reconnaissance, professional and methodical. The sound of Jake's horse approaching drew their attention. The foreman rode in from the direction of the game cameras, his expression grim. He dismounted smoothly, leading his horse to join the others ground-tied near the barn. The morning sun had climbed higher, burning away the last traces of dew and casting stark shadows that seemed to underscore the gravity of the moment. "Cameras are gone," Jake reported simply. "All of them. Not damaged or knocked down, removed clean, like someone knew exactly where to look and how to handle them." He paused, then added, "Found these too." From his pocket, he produced a cigarette pack, the brand expensive and foreign, left behind at every camera site like they wanted us to know they'd been there. Marcus studied the cigarette pack without touching it. The brand was Russian, favored by certain private military contractors he'd encountered in his previous life. The kind of men who blurred the lines between mercenary and professional soldier, who worked for whoever could afford their particular skills. The fact that they weren't bothering to hide their presence sent a clear message. They wanted him to know they were coming. The midday sun hung like a brass coin in the cloudless Montana sky as 3 black SUVs emerged from the shadow of Thunder Ridge's northern slopes. Their approach sent waves of unease rippling through the grazing cattle, the animals' instincts responding to the unfamiliar intrusion. In the nearest pasture, Thunder's crown raised his massive head, nostrils flaring as he caught the scent of strangers on his territory. Marcus watched the vehicles approach from his position near the old oak that marked the ranch's main gate. The tree had stood sentinel for over a century, its branches witnessing the valley's transition from wild frontier to settled ranchland. Now it watched as another kind of wilderness threatened to encroach on Thunder Ridge's hard-won peace. The lead vehicle slowed at the cattle guard, its tinted windows concealing its occupants, but not their professional handling of the heavy SUV. The other 2 vehicles fanned out slightly, maintaining tactical spacing that spoke of military training. Their glossy black paint carried no identifying marks, but the custom brush guards and oversized tires marked them as serious equipment, not the usual ranch vehicles that frequented these roads. Maria had positioned herself casually near the barn, her hand resting on Cisco's collar to keep the border collie from challenging the intruders. The dog's hackles were raised, his usually friendly demeanor replaced by rigid alertness. Bobby Three Hawks had taken a position by the horse pens, his stance relaxed, but offering a clear view of both the approaching vehicles and the back road that led toward Wolf Creek. The lead SUV's engine died with a purr that spoke of expert maintenance. Its driver's door opened first, revealing a man whose expensive boots had never seen honest ranch work. He moved with calculated precision, his casual stance belied by the way his eyes swept the area, cataloging threats and escape routes with professional thoroughness. "Mr. Hawkins," the man called out, his voice carrying a hint of eastern refinement that seemed out of place against the backdrop of sage and prairie grass. "I hope we're not interrupting your day." He smiled, the expression never reaching his pale blue eyes. "My name is Alexander Reed, representing Crossfire Global Solutions." Marcus recognized the company name, a private military contractor that had made headlines during various international conflicts, known for solving problems discreetly and permanently for those who could afford their services. The kind of organization that blurred the lines between security consultation and mercenary work. "My ranch isn't for sale," Marcus responded evenly, maintaining his position by the oak. The old tree's thick trunk offered more than shade, though he doubted Reed had missed its tactical advantages. Reed's smile widened fractionally. "Oh, we're not here about buying anything, Mr. Hawkins. We're here about some property that's already changed hands." He gestured to the second vehicle, and its rear door opened smoothly. A man emerged wearing an impeccably tailored suit that probably cost more than most ranchers made in a month. His silver hair was styled with careful precision, and a gold signet ring gleamed on his right hand. Gerard Kincaid, CEO of Western Frontier Holdings, had finally decided to make his play for Thunder Ridge Valley. Marcus had been expecting this visit since hearing about Kincaid's recent acquisitions in neighboring valleys. The corporate raider, had been systematically buying up ranches across 3 counties, using methods that ranged from aggressive but legal purchases to more questionable tactics when owners proved reluctant to sell. Your cattle have been grazing on land that now belongs to Western Frontier Holdings, Kincaid announced, his tone suggesting he was conferring a favor by pointing this out. The mineral rights to the North Pasture were purchased last week. Your continued use of that land constitutes trespassing. The third SUV's doors opened, disgorging 4 men who moved with the coordinated efficiency of a tactical team. They spread out with casual precision, each taking positions that offered clear fields of fire while maintaining the appearance of casual interest. Their clothes were expensive, but cut to conceal body armor and weapons, their sunglasses hiding eyes that Marcus knew would be constantly scanning for threats. Those mineral rights have been leased to Thunder Ridge Cattle Company for the past 15 years, Marcus replied, his voice carrying the patience of a man used to explaining things to city folk. The lease is registered with the county and runs for another 5 years. Kincaid's smile didn't waver. Ah, but the original lease. Holder James Martinez sold his rights to Western Frontier Holdings. All previous agreements are now void. He produced a document from his breast pocket with a flourish. Our legal team has already filed the necessary paperwork. As of this morning, any cattle found on that land will be considered unauthorized, livestock and removed. Marcus noted how Reed's men had gradually spread out, establishing a subtle perimeter. Their positioning suggested extensive tactical training. These weren't ordinary security contractors, but seasoned operators used to handling delicate situations, the kind of men who knew how to make problems disappear without leaving evidence. Wind shifted slightly, carrying with it the scent of gun oil and cordite. Someone had been doing weapons maintenance recently, and not with the kind of firearms typically used for ranch work. Marcus kept his expression neutral, though his mind catalogued the subtle signs of preparation for violence. The way Reed's men maintained specific distances from each other, their hands never far from concealed weapons, their positions offering interlocking fields of fire. That lease transferred with the mineral rights, Marcus said, his voice remaining calm despite the tension humming in the air. Your lawyers might want to check Section 7 of the original agreement. The transfer clause was specifically written to protect grazing rights. Kincaid's smile took on a predatory edge. Interesting you should mention lawyers, Mr. Hawkins. Given your background, I'd have expected you to handle problems more directly. He paused, letting the implication hang in the air. We know all about your history with Iron Jack Morrison's Special Task Force, about the operations in 3 territories that never made it into official reports, about why a man with your particular skill set would choose to disappear into ranching. The revelation didn't surprise Marcus. Anyone with Kincaid's resources would have done thorough research before making their move. What interested him more was the subtle shift in Reed's team's positioning at the mention of his past. Their casual stances had sharpened almost imperceptibly, hands moving slightly closer to concealed weapons. That was a long time ago, Marcus replied, his voice carrying no hint of the calculations running through his mind. 20 years of peaceful ranching hadn't dulled his ability to read a tactical situation. Reed's team was professional, but they'd just revealed more than they intended. Their reaction to his background suggested they'd been briefed specifically about his capabilities. Kincaid stepped forward, his expensive boots leaving pristine prints in the dust. The world's changing, Mr. Hawkins. This valley, these ranches. They're relics of a dying era. Western Frontier Holdings represents progress. The minerals under your grazing land are worth more than all the cattle in 3 counties. Progress doesn't usually need quite so much firepower, Marcus observed mildly, nodding toward Reed's team, or men with that kind of training. Insurance, Reed interjected smoothly. These days, corporate interests need to be protected. Surely, A man with your experience can appreciate the need for precautions. A meadowlark's warning call cut through the tension, the bird's natural alarm making Cisco's ears prick forward. Maria's hand tightened slightly on the dog's collar, her other hand casually close to the coiled rope at her belt. Bobby had shifted his position by the horse pens, his movement subtle but placing him where he could reach the rifle mounted on his saddle if needed. "You have 24 hours to remove your cattle from the north pasture," Kincaid declared, his tone making it clear this wasn't a negotiation. "After that, Western Frontier Holdings will begin removing unauthorized livestock. Any interference with that process will be dealt with appropriately." The threat wasn't subtle, nor was it meant to be. Reed's team had established clear firing positions, their presence a calculated demonstration of force. They wanted Marcus to understand exactly what appropriately meant in this context. "Might want to check those mineral rights documents carefully," Marcus suggested, his voice carrying a hint of something that made Reed's men tense slightly. "Paperwork has a way of revealing interesting details when you know where to look." Kincaid's smile faltered for just a moment, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his calculated facade. "A friendly warning, Mr. Hawkins. Don't make this more difficult than it needs to be. Men with your history often find that the past has a way of resurfacing at inconvenient moments." Thunder's crown's deep bellow echoed across the pasture. The bull's challenge, carrying across the tension-filled air. The massive animal had moved closer to the fence line, his protective instincts drawing him toward the disturbance in his territory. The bull's presence seemed to underscore the confrontation, raw power held in check by intelligence and patience, much like Marcus himself. "Interesting choice of security contractors," Marcus observed, his eyes briefly meeting Reed's. "Crossfire. Global Solutions made quite a name for themselves in certain circles, especially after that business in Kazakhstan." The slight tightening around Reed's eyes confirmed Marcus's suspicion. These were the same operators who'd handled other property disputes for Western Frontier Holdings, leaving behind a trail of convenient accidents and unexplained disappearances. Jake. Martinez emerged from the barn, carrying a clipboard with casual purpose. His approach seemed random, but Marcus recognized how it split Reed's team's attention, disrupting their carefully maintained fields of fire. The young foreman had unconsciously picked up more than just ranching skills during his years working. "At Thunder Ridge. Boss, got those breeding records you wanted," Jake called out, his voice carrying just the right note of oblivious routine. "Including the documentation on those bloodline transfers from the North Pasture herd." His emphasis on the location was subtle but clear. They had their own paperwork ready. Kincaid's expression flickered again, this time with something closer to annoyance. He hadn't expected this level of preparation, and had likely assumed. Marcus's isolation meant vulnerability. The corporate raider was used to dealing with simple ranchers, not men who understood the intricacies of both legal documentation and tactical positioning. A dust cloud on the horizon caught Marcus's attention. Sheriff Rodriguez's patrol car approaching from town. Its timing wasn't coincidental. Kate had learned her father's knack for showing up exactly when needed. Reed's team had noticed too, their positions shifting slightly to account for the new variable. "Consider carefully what happens next, Mr. Hawkins," Kincaid said, his voice dropping lower. "We've acquired over 30 ranches in the past year. Some owners were reasonable and accepted generous offers. Others, well, ranching can be dangerous work. Equipment fails, accidents happen, especially when people don't understand the changing times." The threat hung in the air like gunsmoke, but it had revealed more than Kincaid intended. 30 ranches, the same number of mysterious accidents and foreclosures that had plagued 3 counties over the past year. The pattern was clear too. Anyone who knew where to look, and Marcus had been looking very carefully. "Times change," Marcus agreed mildly, though something in his tone made Reed's men shift their weight uneasily. "But some things stay the same, like how certain types of accidents leave traces if you know what to look for. Iron Jack taught me that. along with a few other lessons about patience and timing. The mention of Iron Jack's name caused a ripple of tension through Reed's team. Their briefings had clearly covered Marcus's history, but knowing someone's background wasn't the same as understanding what it meant. These men were professionals, used to dealing with obstacles through overwhelming force. They weren't prepared. For someone who'd written the book on handling corrupt power brokers and their mercenary enforcers. Sheriff Rodriguez's patrol car pulled up to the cattle guard, dust settling around its wheels like a thrown gauntlet. Kate stepped out, her badge catching the midday sun. Her arrival changed the dynamics of the confrontation. Whatever happened, next would have an official witness. Just remember the deadline, Kincaid said, his composure slightly cracked. 24 hours, Mr. Hawkins. After that, we start removing livestock one way or another. He turned toward his vehicle, trying to maintain his image of corporate authority. As the SUVs pulled away, their tires kicking up prairie dust, Marcus watched them go with the careful attention of a man who'd learned long ago that the real danger often came after the obvious threats had passed. Sheriff Rodriguez approached, her boots crunching on gravel, her hand resting casually near her service weapon. "Everything all right here, Marcus?" she asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. Kate had been investigating the pattern of ranch acquisitions across the county, building a case one piece at a time. "Just some visitors interested in the north pasture," Marcus replied evenly. "Seem to think they own it now." He turned to Jake, who still held the clipboard. "Get those breeding records to my office, and Jake, make sure Maria and Bobby know to keep the game cameras running tonight. All of them." The young foreman nodded, understanding the unspoken message. The cameras they'd shown Reed's team finding weren't the only ones monitoring Thunder Ridge's borders. Some habits from Marcus's previous life had proven useful in ranching, like maintaining backup surveillance and always having contingency plans. "You know they'll be back," Kate said quietly, once Jake was out of earshot. "Men like that, with that kind of backing, they're used to taking what they want." Marcus watched the dust cloud of the departing SUVs disappear behind a ridge. "Yes," he agreed, his voice carrying the calm certainty of a man who'd seen this type of storm gathering before. "But they're used to dealing with regular ranchers. They don't know what it means to threaten someone who learned strategy from Iron." Jack Morrison himself. Dusk painted Thunder Ridge Valley in shades of purple and gold, the fading light casting long shadows across the ranch's main compound. Marcus sat in his office, studying satellite images of the surrounding territory spread across his desk. Each map was marked with careful notations, property boundaries, water rights, mineral claim markers. But it was the newest additions that drew his attention. Small red X's marking where neighboring ranches had experienced mysterious accidents over the past year. The sound of approaching vehicles cut through the evening quiet. Different from this morning's visitors, heavier engines, more of them. Marcus moved to the window, staying clear of direct sightlines as he counted headlights winding up the access road. 5 vehicles this time, not 3. The lead vehicle was a modified Humvee, its military roots barely concealed by civilian paint. Behind it, 4 black SUVs moved in practiced formation, their headlights cutting through the gathering darkness like predatory eyes. His phone buzzed, a text from Bobby Threehawks at the North Observation Post. 8 men, heavy gear, combat stance, not trying to hide it. A second later, another message from Maria. Armed backup in the tree line, spotted 3 sniper positions. The vehicles stopped short of the main compound, forming a half-circle that faced the ranch house. Their headlights remained on, a deliberate tactic to silhouette anyone who approached them, while keeping their occupants in shadow. Marcus recognized the strategy. He'd used it himself in another life. The Humvee's driver's side door opened first, disgorging a man whose movements spoke of decades of special operations experience. Even in the harsh glare of headlights, Marcus recognized Victor Kane, former Delta Force commander turned private military contractor. His presence elevated this confrontation to a new level. Kane wasn't just another mercenary. He was the kind of operator governments called when they needed problems solved permanently. Kane's reputation in certain circles was legendary. He'd served with distinction in multiple combat zones before disappearing into the shadowy world of private military contracting. His methods were precise, his results permanent, and his loyalty belonged exclusively to whoever held his contract. The fact that Kincaid had brought him in suggested this land grab was part of something much bigger than mineral rights. "Evening, Deadeye," Kane called out, using Marcus's old operational nickname with deliberate familiarity. "Why don't you come on down? Let's discuss business like professionals." His voice carried the gravelly texture of too many years spent. Breathing desert sand and cordite, Marcus waited a calculated 30 seconds before stepping onto his front porch, giving his night vision time to adjust while demonstrating he wouldn't be rushed. The evening breeze carried the scent of sage and prairie grass, mixed with the sharp tang of weapon oil from Kane's team. "Been a while, Victor," Marcus responded, maintaining his position on the porch. "Last I heard, you were handling security consulting in South America. Must be good money in ranch land these days." Kane's laugh held no humor. "Times change, my friend. Private sector pays better and the rules—" He paused meaningfully. "Well, let's say they're more flexible, like your grazing rights situation. Could get messy unless handled by professionals." The SUV doors opened in synchronized precision, disgorging 8 operators who moved with the fluid grace of predators. Their tactical gear was top of the line, their weapons customized for optimal performance. They spread out in a practice formation, establishing overlapping fields of fire while maintaining the appearance of casual readiness. "Mr. Kincaid sends his regards," Kane continued, his posture relaxed but alert. "Seems you weren't impressed by this morning's discussion. He asked me to provide more detailed explanation of the situation." Behind the main force, Marcus caught glimpses of movement in the deepening shadows. More operators taking up sniper positions. Their presence, meant to be just noticeable enough to send a message. Kate would be monitoring her radio, but he knew she couldn't respond officially without proof of direct threats. "Way I heard it," Marcus replied. "Kincaid's been having trouble with his paperwork lately. Seems some of his mineral rights claims aren't as solid as he thought. Might want to check those documents carefully, Victor. Hate to see professionals like you on the wrong side of a legal dispute." Kane's expression shifted slightly, the first genuine reaction he'd shown. "Interesting. You should mention paperwork. Had a chat with some folks down in Carson County yesterday. Seems their county clerk found some irregularities in Western Frontier's filing system. Poor woman was so upset about it, she drove her car off Thompson's Ridge that same night. The threat was explicit. Another accident, arranged to protect Kincaid's interests. But Kane's choice to reveal it suggested something else, a need to demonstrate power that hinted at uncertainty. Professional operators like Kane didn't usually show their cards unless they were trying to force a specific reaction. "Thompson's Ridge is mighty dangerous at night," Marcus observed mildly, "especially when certain types of laser sights interfere with a driver's vision. Leaves interesting evidence too, the kind that shows up real clear under FBI forensic lights." Kane's team shifted almost imperceptibly, their practiced nonchalance cracking slightly. The mention of FBI involvement carried weight. Private, military contractors preferred to operate in shadows, away from federal scrutiny. "You always did pay attention to details," Kane acknowledged, his tone hardening. "But details won't matter much when accidents start happening here. Cattle stampedes are unpredictable, animals spook easily at night. Equipment malfunctions, fence lines fail, lots of ways for a ranch to become unprofitable real quick." Marcus let the threat hang in the air for a moment before responding. "Funny thing about accidents, they leave patterns, like the pattern of ranch foreclosures following Crossfire Global Solutions movements across 3 counties. Or the the pattern of shell companies linking back to offshore accounts. Iron Jack taught me to look for patterns like that. The mention of Iron Jack Morrison's name caused a ripple of tension through Kane's team. The legendary lawman had spent decades building cases against corrupt power brokers and their mercenary enforcers. His methods were legendary, his evidence chains unbreakable. The fact that Marcus had learned from him directly added another layer of complexity to their situation. Iron Jack's dead, Kane stated flatly. Times have changed. These days, money talks louder than any badge. Man's methods live on, though, Marcus replied, like how he taught us to document everything. Every threat, every suspicious accident, every connection between private military contractors and corporate land grabs. Makes for interesting reading, especially for certain federal agencies. A new vehicle approached from the direction of town. Sheriff Rodriguez's patrol car, its lights off, but its presence unmistakable. Kane's snipers would have to adjust their positions now, knowing their movements would be observed by law enforcement. 24 hours, Deadeye, Kane announced, his use of the old nickname now carrying a harder edge. Either your cattle are off that land, or we start solving problems our way. No more warnings, no more professional courtesy. After tonight, everything that happens is just another unfortunate ranch accident. Marcus watched as Kane's team returned to their vehicles with practiced efficiency. Their movement patterns suggested extensive combat experience. These weren't just security contractors, but seasoned operators used to handling wet work for powerful clients. The kind of men who knew how to make problems disappear while maintaining plausible deniability. As the vehicles pulled away, their taillights disappearing into the gathering darkness, Sheriff Rodriguez's car pulled up to the ranch house. Kate stepped out, her expression grim. She'd heard enough to understand the situation had escalated beyond normal law enforcement parameters. Got some interesting reports from Carson County, she said without preamble. County clerk's accident doesn't look so accidental under close examination. State police found trace evidence on her car, professional job, but they got sloppy with the details. Marcus nodded, unsurprised. Kane's team was good, but they were used to operating in environments where evidence collection wasn't a priority. They hadn't counted on local law enforcement with proper forensic training. They'll be back, Kate added unnecessarily. Men like that with that kind of backing, they're used to taking what they want. Marcus turned to study the darkening valley, his mind already formulating plans within plans. Kane's presence changed the dynamics of the situation, but it also confirmed his suspicions about the scale of Kincaid's operation. This wasn't just about mineral rights, it was about power, about the kind of men who thought money and violence gave them the right to take whatever they wanted. Yes, he agreed, his voice carrying the quiet certainty of a man who'd seen this type of storm gathering before. But they're used to dealing with regular ranchers. They don't know what it means to threaten someone who learned strategy from Iron Jack Morrison himself. The night wind carried the scent of coming rain as Kate departed, her patrol car's tires crunching softly on gravel. Marcus remained on the porch, watching the play of moonlight and shadow across his land. The evening's confrontation had revealed more than Kane probably intended. The size of his team, their level of preparation, the specific skills they brought to bear. All pieces of a larger puzzle that was starting to take shape. His satellite phone buzzed, a secure number he hadn't used in years. The display showed only a string of numbers, but Marcus recognized the code immediately. He stepped inside before answering, his voice low despite being alone. "Little early for stargazing, Rachel," he said, using the old operational call sign for one of Iron Jack's most trusted intelligence gatherers. "Stars are telling interesting stories tonight," came the reply, Rachel's voice carrying the same sharp intelligence that had made her the task force's best analyst. "Your visitor, Kane? He's been busy. 3 private military contracts in the past year, all tied to Western Frontier Holdings through shell companies. But here's the interesting part. The money trail leads back to more than just mineral rights. Marcus moved to his office, pulling out a worn leather journal from behind a false panel in his desk. The book contained details of cases from his time with Iron Jack's task force, including patterns of corporate corruption they'd uncovered. "They're using the mineral rights as cover," he stated. Not a question. Bingo. Satellite imagery shows drilling equipment being moved into position across 3 counties, but the geological surveys don't support mining operations. They're building something else, something big enough to need massive land acquisition and private security forces to keep it hidden. The pieces clicked into place. The aggressive land grabs, the professional mercenaries, the need for isolated territory. It all pointed to something far more significant than mineral extraction. "How high does it go?" Marcus asked, though he suspected he knew the answer. "All. The way to DC," Rachel confirmed. "Found some interesting meetings between Kincaid and certain committee members who oversee black budget operations. Whatever they're planning, it's got federal backing, the kind that comes with classified clearance levels." A knock at the door interrupted their conversation. Through the window, Marcus saw Jake Martinez waiting on the porch, his posture suggesting urgent news. "Got to go, Rachel. Keep digging." "Watch your back, Deadeye. These people don't just make problems disappear. They erase every trace that the problems ever existed." Jake's news confirmed the expanding scope of their situation. 3 more ranches served with mineral rights claims today, he reported, all surrounding the North Pasture. They're creating a perimeter. Marcus spread a topographical map across his desk, marking the new claims with red pins. A pattern emerged. The targeted properties formed a rough circle with Thunder Ridge at its center. The terrain would provide natural screening from satellite surveillance, while the remote location would discourage casual observation. "There's more," Jake continued, his voice tight with concern. "Maria spotted surveillance equipment being installed along the ridgeline. High-end stuff, military grade. Bobby says they've got thermal imaging capabilities. The level of technology suggested this was more than just corporate intimidation. Kane's team was setting up a military-grade security perimeter, the kind used to protect classified operations from prying eyes." Thunder's crown's deep bellow echoed across the darkened pastures, the bull's instinct sensing the growing tension in his territory. Marcus moved to the window, studying the shadowy outline of the North Ridge, where Kane's snipers had positioned themselves earlier. Their presence was meant to intimidate, but it had revealed crucial information about their operational patterns and equipment preferences. The rain finally arrived, fat drops pattering against the tin roof like distant gunfire. Lightning illuminated the valley in stark flashes, revealing glimpses of movement along the perimeter. Kane's teams establishing night positions, preparing for whatever came next. Marcus knew the next 24 hours would determine not just the fate of Thunder Ridge, but potentially the exposure of whatever classified operation Kincaid and his federal backers were trying to establish. The question wasn't whether there would be violence. Men like Kane didn't make threats they weren't prepared to back up, but whether the evidence trail would lead back to the real power players behind this land grab. Iron Jack had taught him that the biggest cases often started with the smallest details. Now, watching Kane's operators move through his valley like shadows between lightning flashes, Marcus understood that Thunder Ridge had become ground zero for something much larger than a simple property dispute. The only question was whether he could stay alive long enough to expose it. The storm intensified as midnight approached, sheets of rain drumming against Thunder Ridge Ranch's buildings like nature's own artillery. Marcus moved through his house with practiced silence, checking windows and sightlines while appearing to perform normal evening routines. To any of Kane's surveillance teams watching through thermal imaging, He'd look like a cautious rancher, securing his property against the weather. They wouldn't see him activate the hidden security systems Iron Jack had helped him install when he'd first bought the ranch. Pressure sensors beneath the access roads, motion detectors disguised as broken fence posts, cameras hidden in hollow tree trunks, all feeding data to a secured basement room that hadn't appeared on any building. Plans. Marcus paused at his bedroom window, using the lightning flashes to study the ridgeline. Kane's men had established 3 main observation posts, professional work, but predictable to someone who'd written the manual on rural surveillance operations. Their positions overlooked the obvious approaches, but missed the old game trails that locals had used for generations. A framed photograph on his dresser caught his attention. His graduating class from the Advanced Tactical Operations course 25 years ago. He was younger then, standing straight-backed in his dress uniform beside 11 other elite lawmen. Iron Jack Morrison stood at the center, his legendary silver star glinting on his chest. Only 3 men from that photo were still alive, and one of them had just threatened to destroy everything Marcus had built here. His satellite phone vibrated again. Another message from Rachel. Found something in the classified files. Project designation Obsidian Ranch. Multiple black budget allocations, all routed through shell companies tied to Western Frontier Holdings. Whatever they're building up there, the Pentagon's keeping it off the books. The name triggered a memory. Marcus moved to his office, pulling out an old case file from his task force days. The yellowed pages detailed an investigation into classified facilities being constructed under corporate cover stories. They'd never cracked that case. The trail had gone cold at the highest levels of government clearance. A soft chime from his security system drew his attention. One of the pressure sensors on the back trail had activated, followed by another further up the ridge. Someone was moving through his property, using the storm for cover. The pattern suggested professional reconnaissance, but not Kane's team. They were still maintaining their observation posts. This was someone else. Marcus moved to the gun safe hidden behind his grandfather's clock, entering a combination that opened a concealed compartment. Inside lay pieces of his past that hadn't seen use in 20 years. A custom-modified rifle with a specialized night scope, tactical gear that still fit despite 2 decades of ranch work, and a leather case containing credentials he'd never officially surrendered. The credentials bore the seal of the Organized Crime Task Force, Special Operations Division. His younger face stared back from the ID card, along with a badge number that had been quietly erased from official records when he'd retired to become a rancher. The document's real significance lay in its authorization codes, still active according to Rachel's latest intelligence. Thunder's crown bellowed again, the sound carrying through the storm with preternatural clarity. The bull's warning drew Marcus's attention to the north pasture. Through the rain-streaked windows, he caught a glimpse of movement, figures using thermal blankets to mask their heat signatures from Kane's surveillance equipment. His instincts, honed through years of undercover operations, recognized the tactics. These weren't Kane's mercenaries or Kincaid's corporate thugs. Their movement patterns matched federal tactical teams, specifically the kind used for classified operations, the kind that weren't supposed to exist. Maria's text alert chimed softly. 2 teams, full tactical gear, moving like feds, not mercs. Different approach vector from Kane's boys. A moment later, Bobby added, they're carrying specialized equipment. Looks like EPA markings, but wrong configuration for environmental monitoring. Marcus processed the information while maintaining his routine evening movements for Kane's surveillance. The presence of disguised federal teams suggested this situation went beyond corporate land grabs. Something about Thunder Ridge had drawn attention from agencies that operated in the shadows of official oversight. A leather-bound journal lay hidden beneath the floorboards of his closet, its pages filled with Iron Jack's distinctive handwriting. The old lawman had documented decades of investigations into corruption that reached the highest levels of power. Before his death, he'd entrusted the journal to Marcus, along with a warning that some cases were better left undisturbed until the right moment. Marcus retrieved the journal, its leather worn smooth by years of handling. He turned to entries from 20 years ago, around the time he'd left the task force. Iron Jack's notes mentioned Project Obsidian, connecting it to a series of land acquisitions across multiple states. The pattern matched what was happening. Now, in Thunder Ridge Valley, the storm's intensity increased, wind howling through the valley like a banshee's cry. Lightning illuminated the ranch in stuttering snapshots, revealing glimpses of the chess game being played across his land. Kane's teams maintained their obvious surveillance positions, while the federal operators moved through the shadows, each group unaware of the other's presence. Jake's voice crackled through the secure radio Marcus kept for emergencies. "Boss! Found something weird in the old mine shaft. Some kind of monitoring equipment. Looks military. Definitely not standard geological survey gear." The pieces began falling into place. Thunder Ridge's isolation, the specific properties being targeted, the involvement of classified operations teams. It all pointed to something Iron Jack had investigated decades ago, something that had gotten too close to being exposed before being buried under layers of official secrecy. Marcus moved to his study, pulling out maps from his task force days. The coordinates Iron Jack had marked formed a pattern when overlaid. With Kincaid's recent land acquisitions, Thunder Ridge sat at the center of what looked like a massive grid, each point marking properties that had experienced mysterious accidents or sudden foreclosures. Rachel's next message confirmed his suspicions. "Satellite data shows unusual electromagnetic activity in your area. Started 3 months ago, spiked whenever Western Frontier acquired new properties. Whatever they're building, it's already partially operational." The implications were staggering. Kincaid wasn't just buying land for mineral rights. He was assembling a massive facility, piece by piece, using corporate front companies to hide construction of something that wasn't supposed to exist. Something big enough to require its own private military force and attract attention from classified federal operations teams. A flash of lightning illuminated the century-old oak tree outside his window, its branches thrashing in the wind. For a moment, Marcus caught sight of something attached to its highest branches, sophisticated surveillance equipment that hadn't been there that morning. Kane's team was professional, but they'd missed the signs that they weren't the only ones. Watching Thunder Ridge, his ranch had become the center of an operation involving corporate mercenaries, classified federal programs, and layers of deception that reached the highest levels of government. The same kind of operation that had led to Iron Jack's mysterious death and Marcus's sudden retirement to ranching 20 years ago. The storm's fury matched the tension building across Thunder Ridge Valley. Marcus knew the next 24 hours would determine not just the fate of his ranch, but potentially expose whatever classified project had drawn this much attention from both corporate mercenaries and shadowy government agencies. His training from Iron Jack had prepared him for this kind of multi-layered conspiracy. The old lawman had taught him that the biggest cases often hid behind seemingly simple disputes, like a corporate land grab in a remote valley. Now, watching the shadow game playing out across his property, Marcus understood that Thunder Ridge had become ground zero for something far more significant than cattle and mineral rights. The question wasn't whether there would be violence. Men like Kane didn't make threats they weren't prepared to back up. The real question was whether Marcus could stay alive long enough to expose the truth, just as Iron Jack had trained him to do, the kind of truth that powerful people would kill to keep hidden. Marcus moved to the hidden room behind his offices, wooden panels, entering through a concealed door designed to look like part of the wall. Inside, an array of surveillance monitors displayed feeds from his hidden security system. But it was the old filing cabinet in the corner that drew his attention, specifically the false bottom of the lowest drawer. He pulled out a dusty metal box, its surface unmarked except for a small etching of a hawk in flight. Inside lay remnants of his past life, commendations from operations that officially never happened, photographs of team members whose names had been erased from official records, and most importantly, a small leather notebook with Iron Jack's personal code system. The old lawman had developed the code during his decades of investigating corruption at the highest levels. Each entry appeared to be simple ranch accounting, but hidden within the numbers were details of operations, contacts, and evidence locations. Marcus had spent years memorizing the system, understanding that someday the information might mean the difference between life and death. A particular entry caught his eye, dated just weeks before Iron Jack's death. The apparent feed costs and cattle weights actually documented something called Operation Blackstone, connecting it to electromagnetic anomalies and classified land acquisitions. The pattern matched exactly what was happening now in Thunder Ridge Valley. His secure phone buzzed again, this time a message from Diana Chen, another survivor from his task force days. "Marcus, satellites showing unusual activity in abandoned mines near your property. Energy signatures match classified DoD projects. Be careful. The last person who noticed these patterns was Iron Jack." The implication was clear. Iron Jack's accident 20 years ago might have been connected to whatever was being built now. Marcus had always suspected his mentor's death wasn't random, but he'd never had enough pieces to see the full picture. Until now, through the monitors, he watched Kane's teams rotating positions, maintaining their surveillance while trying to look like normal security patrols. They were good, but their movements revealed military training rather than law enforcement experience. The kind of training that focused on elimination rather than investigation. A different movement pattern caught his attention. The federal teams had split into smaller units, each carrying what looked like scientific equipment disguised as standard gear. Their approach suggested they were conducting some kind of survey, using the storm as cover for whatever measurements they needed. Bobby's voice crackled through the secure radio. "Boss, found something else in the mine shaft. Old marking on the wall. Looks like a hawk in flight, same as your brand." The symbol was Iron Jack's personal marker, used to indicate locations of special interest. The fact that it was in the mine shaft couldn't be coincidence. Marcus pulled out his grandfather's old mining maps, overlaying them with the pattern of recent land acquisitions. The old tunnels formed a network that connected all the properties Kincaid had targeted. But more importantly, they all intersected beneath Thunder Ridge Ranch, directly under the north pasture, where Kane's team had focused their attention. Rachel's next message added another piece to the puzzle. Traced Project Obsidian's power requirements. They're drawing enough electricity to run a small city, but it's all being routed through shell companies and divided among multiple grids to hide the total usage. The storm's intensity peaked, wind and rain lashing against the ranch house like nature itself was trying to expose its secrets. Lightning revealed glimpses of the federal teams moving scientific equipment into position around his property, while Kane's mercenaries maintained their obvious surveillance posts, each group unaware they were being watched by the other. An encrypted file appeared on his secure phone, Rachel's work. Inside were satellite images showing strange constructions being built beneath other properties Kincaid had acquired. The structures were massive but carefully hidden, their purpose unclear, but their classified nature obvious from the security surrounding them. The pieces were forming a pattern that went beyond corporate greed or government overreach. Something was being built across 3 counties piece by piece, hidden behind mineral rights disputes and property acquisitions. Something big enough to require its own power grid, private military security, and the attention of classified federal programs. Thunders. Ground bellowed again, the sound carrying through the storm like a warning. Through the monitors, Marcus watched the bull move purposefully along the fence line, as if he sensed the hidden tensions building across his territory. The animal's instincts matched Marcus's own training. Something was very wrong in Thunder Ridge Valley, and time was running out to expose it. Part 7. Past Connection Revelation. As the Marine helicopters disappeared over the horizon, Marcus retreated to his study, pulling out a hidden shortwave radio he hadn't used in decades. The frequencies were old, but some habits died hard. Iron Jack had insisted every team member maintain emergency communication protocols, even years after they'd gone their separate ways. Static crackled through the speaker before a familiar voice emerged. Echo 7 Delta, authenticate. The call sign belonged to Michael Torres, another survivor from the original task force. His voice carried the weight of urgent news. Sierra 4 Alpha, Rolling Thunder, Marcus responded, using the authentication code they'd established 20 years ago. The fact that Torres was using the emergency channel meant something significant had changed. Project Obsidian isn't just about land acquisition, Torres reported. His transmission, masked by sophisticated encryption, found records in the Pentagon's archived files. Same project designation appeared in 85, linked to electromagnetic weapons research. Everything went dark after 3 scientists disappeared. Marcus's mind raced, connecting dots that had eluded him for decades. The strange equipment Kincaid's teams were installing, the specific properties being targeted, the electromagnetic anomalies. All pieces of a puzzle Iron Jack had started assembling before his death. A knock at his door interrupted his thoughts. Through the security camera, he saw Ruby Martinez waiting on his porch, holding what appeared to be a simple coffee thermos. But Ruby had been Iron Jack's primary intelligence courier back in the day, using her diner as a front for gathering information across 3 states. "Thought you might need this," Ruby said as he opened the door, her voice carrying layers of meaning. The thermos, when opened, contained not coffee, but a USB drive hidden in a false bottom, old-school tradecraft that had served them well during active operations. Inside his study, Marcus connected the drive to a secure laptop. Files appeared, surveillance photos, financial records, and most importantly, personnel files for Kane's security teams. Ruby's network of diner owners and restaurant staff across the region had been quietly documenting suspicious activities for months. "Kane's not just running security," Ruby explained, her voice low despite being inside. "He's building a private army. Every property Kincaid acquires gets staffed with former Special Forces operators, but here's the interesting part. They're all connected to classified weapons testing programs." The pieces clicked into place. Marcus pulled out Iron Jack's old case files, focusing on investigations from the mid-80s. The pattern was identical: corporate land acquisitions hiding classified weapons research, private security teams with specialized training, and strange electromagnetic phenomena that defied explanation. His secure phone buzzed with a message from Rachel. Found Iron Jack's last case notes. He was investigating electromagnetic weapon tests disguised as mining operations. Trail led to multiple corporate fronts, all connected to classified defense contracts. Same pattern we're seeing now. A hidden compartment in Marcus's desk contained one last piece of evidence, a micro SD card Iron Jack had given him shortly before his death. Insurance, the old lawman had called it, in case they ever tried to restart the program. The card contained coordinates, surveillance photos, and, most importantly, documentation of unauthorized weapons tests conducted on civilian populations. Iron Jack had discovered that certain corporations were using remote communities as unwitting test subjects for experimental electromagnetic technologies. Thunder's crown's agitated bellowing drew Marcus to the window. The bull's behavior had changed since Kincaid's teams installed their equipment, more aggressive, more erratic. Similar reports were coming in from other ranches across the valley. The animals know, Ruby said quietly, just like they did back in '85. Started with behavioral changes in livestock, then affected people. Memory problems, mood changes, unexplained. Illnesses. Iron Jack documented it all before they shut him down. Marcus studied satellite images Rachel had provided, overlaying them with Iron Jack's old investigation notes. The pattern was clear. Kincaid wasn't just building a classified facility, he was reconstructing a weapons testing program that had been shut down decades ago after Iron Jack got too close to exposing it. A hidden wall safe yielded one final piece of evidence: Iron Jack's personal journal, its pages filled with detailed observations of the original Project Obsidian. The old lawman had connected the program to a shadowy group within the Defense Department, one that viewed rural communities as expendable test sites for experimental weapons. They're not just stealing land, Marcus realized, reading through Iron Jack's notes. They're recreating the original test grid. Each property they acquire is a point in the array, positioned exactly where the '85 program had their monitoring stations. Ruby nodded grimly. Kane's teams aren't just providing security, they're running the same containment protocols from the original program, ensuring no one connects the electromagnetic phenomena to their equipment. The journal's final entries detailed Iron Jack's discovery of the program's true purpose. The electromagnetic weapons weren't designed for traditional warfare. They were meant for domestic population control, capable of influencing behavior and memories across entire regions. A series of photographs fell from the journal's pages. Surveillance shots from 1985 showing younger versions of familiar faces. Gerard Kincaid appeared in several, standing alongside military officials at classified facilities. But it was the last photo that confirmed Marcus's suspicions. Victor Kane, 20 years younger, wearing the insignia of the original Project Obsidian's security force. Kane wasn't just hired muscle, Marcus said, studying the photo. He was part of the original program. That's why Kincaid brought him in. He knows how to handle containment when the effects become visible. Ruby's expression darkened. Already starting to see the signs, ranchers reporting memory gaps, unusual behavior. Same patterns Iron Jack documented before they engineered his accident. The sound of approaching vehicles drew their attention. Through the security cameras, they watched a convoy of unmarked trucks moving along the valley's access roads. Each vehicle carried equipment similar to what Kane's teams had installed, more pieces of the weapons array being moved into position. They're accelerating the timeline, Ruby observed. Iron Jack's notes suggested they needed months to establish a functioning grid. They're trying to do it in weeks. Marcus's satellite phone buzzed with an urgent message from Rachel. Massive power surge detected in your region. They're running preliminary tests. Whatever you're planning, do it fast. Once the array is fully operational, no one in the valley will remember anything was wrong. The implications were staggering. Kincaid and Kane weren't just trying to steal land or build a classified facility. They were reconstructing a weapons program designed to control entire populations through electromagnetic manipulation. The same program Iron Jack had died trying to expose. Thunder's crown bellowed again, the bull's distress echoing across the valley like a warning. Through the window, Marcus watched as more of Kincaid's trucks moved into position, carrying pieces of a weapon that could rewrite the memories and behaviors of everyone in Thunder Ridge Valley. The question wasn't just about protecting his ranch anymore. It was about preventing history from repeating itself, about exposing a program that had already caused untold damage to countless communities. Iron Jack had given his life to stop Project Obsidian the first time. Now it fell to Marcus to finish what his mentor had started. Ruby checked her phone, her expression grim, getting reports from other diners across the region. More equipment being moved in, more security teams taking positions. They're building something bigger than the '85 array, Marcus laid out Iron Jack's photos and documents, studying the pattern of the original weapons test grid. Understanding how it had been constructed would be key to dismantling its modern equivalent. Before it became fully operational, the old lawman's final written words caught his eye. Some battles can't be won with guns. The biggest fights are won with evidence, with truth that can't be buried or erased. Even if they change what people remember, documents tell stories that can't be forgotten. Now, watching Kincaid's operation unfold across his valley, Marcus understood why Iron Jack had spent years building evidence trails and establishing secure information networks. The old lawman had known this day might come, known that someone would try to restart Project Obsidian. The real question was whether Marcus could expose the truth before the weapons array became operational, before everyone in Thunder Ridge Valley forgot there was anything to fight against. Ruby moved to the window, her posture shifting subtly as she scanned the horizon. Her movements revealed training that went beyond simple observation, the kind of situational awareness that came from years of covert operations. "There's something else," she said quietly, pulling a faded photograph from her jacket. "Found this in my old case files. Thought you should see it." The image showed a younger Iron Jack standing beside a familiar figure, Marcus's father, both men wearing the insignia of a classified military research division. "Dad never mentioned working with Iron Jack," Marcus said, studying the photo. The background showed equipment similar to what Kincaid's teams were now installing across the valley. "Because they erased it from his memory," Ruby explained. "Your father was one of the original Project Obsidian scientists. He designed the containment protocols, the methods for hiding the array's effects. When he discovered what they were really building, he tried to shut it down. That's when they tested the weapon on him." The revelation hit Marcus like a physical blow. His father's sudden career change, the move to Montana, the strange gaps in his memories, all of it connected to Project Obsidian. Iron Jack hadn't recruited Marcus by chance. He'd been watching over his old friend's son, waiting for the right moment to reveal the truth. A hidden compartment in the photo's frame contained a micro SD card, its surface marked with his father's distinctive handwriting. When connected to Marcus's secure laptop, it revealed technical specifications for the original electromagnetic array, including its vulnerabilities. "Your father built in a weakness," Ruby continued, "a frequency that could disrupt the entire system. Iron Jack documented everything, spread the evidence across multiple secure locations. He knew they'd try again someday, knew they'd need the same geographical points for the array to function." Marcus's satellite phone buzzed with another message from Rachel. "Found personnel files from the original project. Your father wasn't the only scientist they silenced. 3 others disappeared after raising ethical concerns. Their families were told they'd accepted positions overseas." The sound of Thunder's crown's distressed bellowing drew their attention. Through the security cameras, they watched as more of Kincaid's teams positioned their equipment. Each installation pulsed with electromagnetic energy, creating a grid pattern visible only through specialized sensors. "The animals are just the first sign," Ruby said grimly. "Your father's notes detailed the progression. Livestock behavior changes within hours of activation. Within days, people start experiencing memory alterations. Within weeks, entire communities forget there was ever anything wrong." A new file appeared on Marcus's secure laptop. Michael Torres had found more archived documents. The original Project Obsidian wasn't just about weapons testing. It was part of a larger program designed to control rural populations, to ensure compliance in regions designated for classified operations. They're not just building a weapon, Marcus realized, studying his father's technical specifications. They're creating a way to rewrite reality itself, to make people accept whatever story Kincaid and his backers want them to believe. Ruby nodded, her expression dark. "Already happening. Ranchers who signed over their land claim they don't remember fighting the sale. Witnesses to suspicious accidents suddenly change their stories. The array doesn't have to be fully operational. to start affecting memories. Through the window, they watched as more unmarked trucks moved into position around Thunder Ridge Valley. Each vehicle carried components that would strengthen the electromagnetic grid, expanding its influence across the region. Iron Jack knew this day would come, Ruby said, pulling out one final piece of evidence, a key to a safety deposit box in the next county. Your father gave him everything: research notes, technical specifications, documentation of the original, and tests, all the evidence needed to expose Project Obsidian, spread across multiple secure locations. The old lawman had planned for this contingency, had spent years building a network of evidence caches that could survive even if memories were altered. He'd trained his team to recognize the signs, to maintain secure communications protocols that would resist electromagnetic interference. Marcus's father had gone further, embedding critical information in seemingly innocent ranch records. His cattle breeding logs contained encrypted data about the array's frequencies, hidden in plain sight as genetic markers and bloodline notes. The truth about Thunder Ridge Valley, about Project Obsidian, about his father's role in creating and then trying to stop it, all of it had been waiting for this moment. Iron Jack and Marcus's father had spent years preparing for the program's return, building an evidence trail that could survive even electromagnetic memory manipulation. Now, watching Kincaid's operation unfold across his land, Marcus understood the full weight of his inheritance. It wasn't just about protecting a ranch or stopping corporate land grabs. It was about exposing a program that had already destroyed countless lives, about finishing what his father and Iron Jack had died trying to prevent. The question was whether he could gather enough evidence, activate enough secure protocols before the array reached full power, before the truth itself became just another manipulated memory in Thunder Ridge Valley. The midday sun cast harsh shadows across Thunder Ridge Valley as Marcus initiated the counterplan he'd spent 20 years preparing. His first move wasn't what Kane or Kincaid would expect. Not a confrontation or legal challenge, but a series of precisely timed information releases through secure channels Iron Jack had established decades ago. Package 1 delivered, Rachel's message confirmed. The Congressional Oversight Committee just received documentation of unauthorized weapons testing. Senator Harrison is particularly interested in electromagnetic activity near his home district. Marcus watched through high-powered binoculars as Kane's security teams suddenly shifted their patterns. Their radio chatter, intercepted through equipment hidden in the old oak tree, revealed the first cracks in their confident facade. "Command wants full containment protocol," one operator reported, his voice tense. "Someone leaked classified specs. To the feds, top brass is worried about satellite surveillance." Kane's response crackled through the intercepted channel. "Maintain cover operations, no overt security presence. If anyone asks, we're conducting environmental surveys." But Marcus had already ensured their cover story wouldn't hold. Ruby's network of diner owners across 3 states had been documenting every equipment delivery, every suspicious vehicle, every unusual electromagnetic reading. The evidence was now flowing to carefully chosen recipients, journalists, federal investigators, and congressional staffers who couldn't be easily silenced. "Got movement at the Capitol," Michael Torres reported through their secure channel. Dodie Oversight Committee just scheduled an emergency session. Someone finally connected the electromagnetic signatures to missing classified technology. Marcus's satellite phone buzzed with another update from Rachel. FBI Cyber Division flagged unusual activity in Western Frontier Holdings networks. Their security protocols match stolen military encryption. Kane's digital footprint just lit up every federal monitoring system. Through his surveillance setup, Marcus watched Kane's teams scrambling to reposition their equipment. They were professional, enough to maintain operational security, but their movements betrayed growing uncertainty. The confident precision of their morning operation had been replaced by the subtle tension of men, realizing they'd lost the initiative. Getting reports from other ranchers, Sheriff Rodriguez's voice came through the secure radio. Strange equipment. Malfunctions wherever Kincaid's teams set up their monitoring stations, almost like someone's broadcasting interference on their frequencies. Marcus allowed himself a small smile. His father's technical specifications had included exact details of the electromagnetic array's vulnerabilities. For the past hour, devices hidden across Thunder Ridge had been transmitting precisely calibrated signals, disrupting the weapon's calibration sequence. Kane's voice crackled through the intercepted channels again, this time with an edge of frustration. All teams, implement signal isolation protocols. Someone's accessing our secure frequencies. Switch to backup communications immediately. But Marcus had anticipated this move. Ruby's network had already documented their backup frequencies, gathered from monitoring previous operations across multiple states. Each attempt to switch channels just provided more evidence of military-grade equipment being used without authorization. WSJ reporter asking questions about Western Frontier Holdings, Rachel reported. Found connections between Kincaid's shell companies and missing Defense Department funds. Story runs in tomorrow's edition unless they receive official comment. The pressure was building from multiple directions, each revelation forcing Kane's team to react rather than execute their original plan. Marcus had learned from Iron Jack that the most effective strategy wasn't direct confrontation, but orchestrating events so the enemy's own actions worked against them. Through his binoculars, Marcus watched as one of Kane's technical teams struggled with malfunctioning equipment. The electromagnetic array required precise calibration that became impossible with the interference being generated by Marcus's hidden transmitters. Signal degradation at all monitoring stations, a technician reported through the intercepted channels. Array synchronization failed. Sir, we can't maintain field coherence with this level of interference. Kane's response was immediate. Find the source of the interference and shut it down. We need this array operational before the Congressional Committee can mobilize oversight. But locating the source of the interference would be impossible. Marcus had used his father's research to design a system that mimicked natural electromagnetic phenomena. Any attempt to track the signals would lead Kane's teams on a wild goose chase across the valley. Sheriff Rodriguez's patrol car appeared on the access road, leading a convoy of state police vehicles. Their arrival wasn't a coincidence. Marcus had ensured that evidence of unauthorized weapons testing would reach state authorities at precisely this moment. Got unmarked vehicles moving into position, Kate reported through their secure channel. State boys are really interested in those equipment readings. Brought their own monitoring gear this time. Marcus's satellite phone displayed another update. From Rachel, Pentagon Internal Affairs just opened an investigation into Project Obsidian. Someone connected the electromagnetic signatures to classified weapons patents. Kane's security clearance is being audited. The pieces were falling into place, each revelation forcing Kane's team to deviate further from their carefully planned operation. Instead of establishing their weapons array, they were now scrambling to maintain operational security while federal and state authorities closed in. Command wants us to accelerate the timeline, Kane's voice crackled through the intercepted channels. Full power test authorized regardless of calibration status. Prepare for an emergency activation sequence. This was the moment Marcus had been waiting for. Emergency activation without proper calibration would cause the array to produce easily detectable electromagnetic signatures. Signatures that would trigger every monitoring system within 100 miles. All stations, commence power-up sequence, Kane ordered, his voice tight with controlled tension. Maximum output, full spectrum coverage. We need this grid operational now. Marcus watched through his surveillance system as Kane's teams initiated their emergency protocols. Equipment hummed to life across the valley, each installation adding its energy to the growing electromagnetic field. But without proper calibration, without the precise synchronization his father's design required, the array was doomed to fail. Spectacularly. "Sir, we're getting dangerous power fluctuations," a technician reported urgently. "Field coherence is breaking down. The interference is causing cascade failures across the grid." Kane's response was immediate but futile. "Maintain power levels. We need this array operational before federal oversight arrives. Push through the interference." But Marcus had ensured that pushing through wouldn't be possible. His hidden transmitters automatically adjusted their frequencies to match and disrupt each new power level, using algorithms based on his father's original research. Thunder's crowns. Warning bellow echoed across the valley as the electromagnetic field built to dangerous levels. The bull's instincts recognized what Kane's team was about to learn. Some forces couldn't be controlled through brute force alone. "Critical failure imminent." The technician's voice carried real fear now. "Sir, we're losing containment. Field harmonics are collapsing across all sectors." Marcus watched through his binoculars as Kane's hastily established weapons array began to self-destruct. Each installation sparked and sputtered, their carefully hidden military technology revealing itself through catastrophic failure. State police vehicles converged on the failing equipment stations, their own monitoring gear documenting every emission signature. Kane's teams were now caught between maintaining operational security and preventing a complete system meltdown that would draw even more attention. "All teams, implement emergency shutdown," Kane ordered. But it was too late. The arrays, uncontrolled, power surge had already triggered alerts across multiple federal monitoring systems. Evidence of classified military technology being tested on civilian populations was now impossible to hide. Marcus's satellite phone buzzed with a final update from Rachel. "DoD security teams inbound. Someone just connected Project Obsidian to missing experimental weapons platforms. Kane's operation is officially compromised." The power shift was complete. Kane's carefully planned operation had been transformed into exactly the kind of public spectacle their classified program couldn't survive. Every attempt to maintain control had only generated more evidence, more attention from authorities they couldn't silence or control. Through his surveillance system, Marcus watched as Kane's professional facade finally cracked. The former Delta Horse commander knew what this meant. Federal investigation, congressional oversight, and exposure of classified operations that were never meant to see daylight. The question now wasn't whether Project Obsidian would be exposed, but how many. Layers of corruption would be revealed in its fall. Marcus had learned from Iron Jack that timing was everything, and the time had come to let the dominoes fall where they may. The valley erupted in a new wave of activity as Kincaid's helicopter appeared over the eastern ridge, the corporate mogul having been summoned by Kane's urgent reports. Through the intercepted communications, Marcus could hear the growing panic in their exchanges. "This isn't just a technical glitch," Kincaid's voice carried barely controlled fury. "Someone's orchestrating this. The congressional inquiries, the media attention, the equipment failures, it's all coordinated." Kane's response was clipped. "Dead eyes playing a deeper game. This isn't about protecting his ranch. He's had 20 years to prepare, and he's using Iron Jack's old playbook. Multiple pressure points, simultaneous exposure on different fronts." Marcus's secure phone lit up with a series of rapid updates. Rachel had timed her information releases perfectly, each revelation building on the last. The DOJ just opened a formal investigation into Western Frontier Holdings' federal contracts. 3 congressional committees demanding emergency hearings. On unauthorized weapons testing, Pentagon Internal Affairs freezing all projects connected to Project Obsidian's security protocols. The electromagnetic interference from Marcus's hidden transmitters continued to wreak havoc with Kane's equipment. Each attempt to stabilize their array only generated more easily detectable emissions, creating a feedback loop of escalating technical failures. "Sir, we're detecting multiple surveillance platforms overhead," one of Kane's operators reported. "Satellite coverage and high-altitude reconnaissance. Someone's watching every move we make." Ruby's voice came through Marcus's secure channel. "My people report federal task force units mobilizing across 3 states. They're moving to secure every property connected to Western Frontier Holdings. Kane's backup teams are cut off." Through his surveillance system, Marcus watched Kincaid pace beside his helicopter, his corporate composure cracking as reports of mounting disasters poured in. The businessman's phone rang constantly, each call bringing news of another layer of their operation being exposed. "We're getting calls from every regulatory agency in Washington," Kincaid snapped at Kane. "SEC, FBI, DOD oversight. Someone dumped enough evidence to trigger simultaneous investigations. How did they get this much documentation?" But Marcus had ensured their document security was compromised months ago. Ruby's network had been quietly copying data, gathering technical specifications, and tracking financial transactions across multiple jurisdictions. Every attempt to contain the situation just revealed more connections to classified programs. "Boss, you need to see this," Jake's voice came through Marcus's radio. "Those university researchers who've been studying local geological formations. They just published a paper on electromagnetic anomalies in the valley, included full spectral analysis of Kincaid's equipment emissions. The timing was perfect. Academic publication meant the technical data was now in the public domain, available to any investigator looking into unauthorized weapons testing. Kane's teams couldn't shut down scientific research without drawing even more attention. "All security teams, implement Protocol 0, Kane ordered through their compromised communications. "Total withdrawal, maximum deniability. Scrub every site, leaving no trace of operational presence." But Marcus had anticipated this too. His surveillance systems had documented every piece of equipment, every vehicle movement, every communication. The evidence was already secured in multiple locations, protected by protocols Iron Jack had designed to resist any attempt at elimination. "Sir, we have a problem with the withdrawal," one of Kane's team leaders reported. "Local law enforcement has blocked all access roads. They're documenting every vehicle that leaves the valley, checking serial numbers against federal databases." Sheriff Rodriguez had positioned her deputies perfectly, ensuring that Kane's teams couldn't remove their classified equipment without official scrutiny. The very operational security protocols they relied on were now working against them. Project Obsidian is compromised beyond containment, Kane finally admitted to Kincaid. "Someone mapped our entire operation, gathered evidence at every level. This isn't just exposure, it's systematic dismantling of everything we built." Marcus watched through his binoculars as realization dawned on their faces. This wasn't a simple rancher protecting his land. This was the culmination of 20 years of patient preparation, using every lesson Iron Jack had taught about exposing corruption at the highest levels. Federal marshals just seized Western Frontier Holdings. Corporate offices, Rachel reported through their secure channel, found connections to classified weapons programs, unauthorized testing protocols. Kincaid's entire operation is unraveling. The power shift was now complete and irreversible. Kane's teams were trapped between maintaining operational security and avoiding federal prosecution. Every attempt to contain the situation only generated more evidence of classified weapons being tested on civilian populations. Thunder's Crown bellowed one final challenge as federal helicopters appeared on the horizon. The bull had survived the electromagnetic interference, his instincts proving more reliable than Kane's sophisticated equipment. Now he watched with primal satisfaction as intruders were driven from his territory. The victory wasn't just about stopping a corporate land grab or exposing a classified weapons program. It was about proving that patience, preparation, and carefully gathered evidence could overcome even the most powerful adversaries. Iron Jack's methods, combined with Marcus's father's technical knowledge, had created a strategy that even professional operators couldn't counter. Through his surveillance feeds, Marcus watched as Kane's teams began their desperate withdrawal, leaving behind millions in classified equipment they couldn't risk being caught transporting. The valley would recover, the electromagnetic interference would fade, but the evidence of their operation would ensure Project Obsidian could never be restarted. The time for hiding in the shadows had passed. Now, it was time to let the full truth come to light, to expose every layer of corruption that had enabled this operation. Iron Jack would have been proud. His methods had proven that justice, while sometimes slow, was ultimately unstoppable when backed by undeniable evidence. The afternoon sun beat down on Thunder Ridge Valley as Marcus made his next move. Instead of confronting Kane's retreating forces, he reached for a dusty ledger hidden behind his grandfather's portrait. The book's weathered pages contained more than cattle records. Embedded within innocent-looking numbers were coordinates, frequencies, and operational codes from the original Project Obsidian. "Time to show them what we've really been building," he told Ruby, who nodded in understanding. While Kane and Kincaid had focused on installing their weapons array, Marcus had spent years creating something far more powerful, a network of truth that couldn't be erased or controlled. His satellite, phone connected to a secure server Iron Jack had established before his death. With a few keystrokes, Marcus activated protocols that began releasing encrypted files to law enforcement agencies across the country. Each file contained a piece of the puzzle, carefully gathered evidence that would expose Project Obsidian's true scope. Multiple agencies receiving data packets, Rachel confirmed through their secure channel. FBI counterintelligence, DOJ public corruption unit, Treasury financial crimes. They're all getting different pieces of the same operation. Through his surveillance system, Marcus watched Kane's team struggling to maintain operational security, while dealing with cascading system failures. Their sophisticated equipment, designed to manipulate electromagnetic fields, was now broadcasting evidence of its own classified nature. "Sir, we've got a bigger problem," one of Kane's operators reported through their compromised communications. "Someone's broadcasting our technical specifications on open frequencies. Every monitoring station in 3 states is picking up our signature." Marcus allowed himself a grim smile. The frequencies being broadcast weren't random. They were the exact ones documented in his father's hidden research, the same ones that would prove the equipment's military origins. "Getting reports from other ranchers," Sheriff Rodriguez's voice came through their secure radio. "Those environmental monitoring stations Kincaid installed, they're all failing in the same way, all broadcasting classified frequencies. State police are documenting everything." The strategic advantage Marcus had built wasn't just about gathering evidence. It was about creating a situation where Kane's own protocols would work against them. Every attempt to shut down their equipment just generated more proof of unauthorized weapons testing. "Mr. Kincaid wants immediate containment." Kane's voice carried barely controlled frustration. "Implement blackout protocols on all communications. Nothing leaves this valley without direct authorization." But Marcus had ensured their communications blackout would be impossible. The very frequencies they needed to control were now being monitored by university researchers, amateur radio operators, and law enforcement agencies across 3 states. "Latest from the Pentagon," Rachel reported. "Internal affairs just connected. Project Obsidian's equipment signatures to classified weapons platforms that went missing last year. They're mobilizing technical teams to identify unauthorized testing sites. Through his binoculars, Marcus watched as Kincaid's helicopter landed near the failed array's central control station. The corporate mogul's face was a mask of fury as he confronted Kane about their collapsing operation. "How did they get this level of technical detail?" Kincaid demanded. "These frequencies, these protocols, they're all classified at the highest levels. No one outside the program should even know they exist." Kane's response was cut short by new alarms from their equipment. Marcus had timed the next phase of his plan perfectly. As their systems tried to implement blackout protocols, they triggered dormant programs hidden in their own operating software. "Sir, our encryption is failing," a technician reported urgently. "Something's corrupting the command codes. We're broadcasting in the clear on all frequencies." Marcus's father had left more than just technical specifications. He'd hidden backdoors. In Project Obsidian's original programming, weaknesses that could be exploited to force the system into exposing itself. Multiple federal agencies monitoring these broadcasts, Rachel confirmed. They're getting real-time proof of classified weapon signatures. Kane's teams can't shut it down without admitting they have control of restricted military technology. The strategic advantage was now complete. Every defensive measure Kane's team could take would only generate more evidence. Every attempt to contain the situation would attract more attention from authorities they couldn't control. "We've got university research teams setting up monitoring stations," Sheriff Rodriguez reported. "They're tracking electromagnetic emissions across the entire valley. Something about unprecedented atmospheric phenomena that needs to be documented." Marcus had arranged for legitimate scientific interest in the valley's electromagnetic properties months ago. Now, Kane's teams couldn't interfere with academic research without raising even more suspicions. "Boss, you need to see this," Jake's voice carried urgency through their secure channel. "Those signal anomalies from Kane's equipment, they match exactly with the patterns your father documented 20 years ago. Same frequencies, same power signatures." The revelation confirmed what Marcus had suspected. Kincaid's operation wasn't just similar to the original Project Obsidian, it was an exact recreation. They'd used the same classified technology, the same protocols, and now they'd fallen into the same traps. "All teams, implement emergency shutdown," Kane ordered through their compromised communications. "Total power down, remove all storage devices, sanitize every station." But emergency shutdown only triggered more of Marcus's father's hidden protocols. Each piece of equipment began broadcasting its full technical specifications, providing irrefutable proof of its classified military origins. "Federal task force units moving into position," Rachel reported. "They're coordinating with state police to secure all sites containing unauthorized weapon signatures. Kane's teams are boxed in." Through his surveillance feeds, Marcus watched as realization dawned on Kincaid's face. The corporate mogul finally understood that this wasn't just about losing control of the operation. It was about exposing every layer of corruption that had enabled Project Obsidian's resurrection. "You don't understand what you've done," Kincaid shouted toward Marcus's ranch house, his composure completely shattered. "This program has protection at the highest levels. You can't just expose classified operations without consequences." But Marcus had learned from Iron Jack that the most powerful people were often the most vulnerable to exposure. Their very influence, their connections to classified programs, made them unable to defend themselves without revealing even more secrets. "Getting interesting chatter from Washington," Rachel's voice carried satisfaction. "Multiple oversight. Committees demanding emergency hearings. Someone just connected Project Obsidian to unauthorized weapons testing in civilian areas. The political fallout is starting. The strategic advantage Marcus had built went beyond simple evidence gathering. He'd created a situation where the very power of his opponents, their classified technology, their political connections, their need for secrecy, became their greatest weakness. Thunder's crown's challenging bellow echoed across the valley as federal helicopters approached from multiple directions. The bull's territorial display matched the moment. Invaders being driven from land they'd tried to claim through deception and force. Through his surveillance system, Marcus watched as Kane's teams abandoned their equipment, their professional discipline cracking under the realization that they'd been outmaneuvered on every level. Their classified weapons array, instead of controlling the valley's population, had become proof of their unauthorized activities. The time for hiding in the shadows had passed. Now, it was time to let the full truth emerge, to expose every layer of corruption that had enabled Project Obsidian's return. Iron Jack would have been proud. His methods, combined with Marcus's patient preparation, had proven that even the most powerful conspiracies could be brought down by carefully documented truth. The valley's atmosphere crackled with more than just electromagnetic energy as Marcus initiated the final phase of his evidence release. Each piece had been strategically positioned like pieces on a chessboard, ready to counter any move Kane or Kincaid might attempt. "Sir, we've got new problems," one of Kane's operators reported urgently. "Someone just accessed our secure archives. Historical data from the original Project Obsidian is being uploaded to multiple federal servers." Marcus had saved this revelation for the perfect moment. The archived data wasn't just technical specifications. It contained video footage of the original weapons tests, documented evidence of unauthorized human experimentation that could never be explained away as simple environmental monitoring. Financial trails activating across the globe, Rachel reported through their secure channel. Every shell company, every hidden account we traced, they're all being flagged simultaneously by international banking regulators. Kincaid's entire network is lit up like Christmas. The corporate mogul's phone rang constantly now, each call bringing news of another firewall crumbling. Marcus had ensured that the evidence would emerge from so many sources that no amount of influence could contain it all. Multiple media outlets running breaking stories, Ruby added, monitoring her network of contacts. Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, Reuters, they all got different pieces of the puzzle. No single source to discredit, no way to control the narrative. Through his surveillance system, Marcus watched as Kane's professional facade finally cracked. The former Delta Force commander recognized the tactical brilliance of the strategy. His own training told him they'd been outmaneuvered beyond recovery. "They didn't just expose our current operation," Kane told Kincaid, his voice carrying a grim resignation. "They documented everything. 20 years of classified programs, unauthorized tests, covered-up accidents. All of it verifiable through multiple sources." Maria's voice came through the secure radio. "Boss, those university researchers, they're not just monitoring electromagnetic signatures, they're correlating current readings with historical data from weather stations, geological surveys, even amateur radio logs. Building a 20-year timeline of unauthorized testing, Marcus had carefully cultivated these academic connections, ensuring that legitimate scientific interest would provide another layer of verification for the evidence he'd gathered. Kane's teams couldn't interfere with university research without drawing even more attention to what they were trying to hide. Total system collapse at all monitoring stations, a technician reported frantically. The shutdown protocols, they're triggering some kind of embedded program. Every piece of equipment is broadcasting its full technical specifications, including classified design origins. This was Marcus's father's final failsafe, hidden in Project Obsidian's original code. Any attempt to erase the system's data would instead force it to reveal everything, down to the classified military contracts that had created it. Federal task force units have secured the perimeter, Sheriff Rodriguez reported. They're treating this as a classified weapons incident now. Full hazmat teams, technical specialists, everything by the book. No way to hide what this equipment really is. The strategic advantage Marcus had built wasn't just about exposing the truth. It was about making it impossible for anyone to bury it again. Each piece of evidence had been carefully positioned to support multiple others, creating an unbreakable chain of proof. The Congressional Oversight Committee just went into an emergency session. Rachel's update carried satisfaction. Someone connected Project Obsidian to that classified weapons facility that accidentally burned down last year. The political dominoes are starting to fall. Through his binoculars, Marcus watched as Kincaid paced beside his helicopter, the corporate titan's empire crumbling in real time. Every phone call brought news of another security breach, another exposed connection, another piece of evidence emerging from sources he couldn't control. "You think exposing this will change anything?" Kincaid shouted toward Marcus's position, his voice carrying desperate fury. "There are powers behind this project that you can't imagine, influences that can rewrite history itself." But Marcus had learned from Iron Jack that the most powerful people were often the most vulnerable to the simple truth. Their very ability to control narratives, to bury evidence, made them blind to the power of widely distributed, irrefutable proof. "Latest from the DoD," Rachel reported. "Internal Affairs just connected Project Obsidian's technical signatures to 3 other classified sites. They're rolling up the entire network, following equipment signatures we documented." The strategic advantage was now self-sustaining. Each revelation forced another, each exposed connection led to more discoveries. The very scope of the conspiracy had become its greatest weakness. Too many pieces to hide, too many connections to serve. Thunder's Crown's victory bellow echoed across the valley as federal helicopters landed near the failed weapons array. The bull's instinctive defense of his territory had been matched by Marcus's methodical protection of the truth, both proving that some forces couldn't be controlled through deception and power alone. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Thunder Ridge Valley as Gerard Kincaid faced the magnitude of his failure. Standing beside his idling helicopter, the corporate titan watched his carefully constructed empire disintegrate piece by piece. Each alert on his phone, each urgent message from his legal team, confirmed another layer of protection crumbling away. "All operations compromised beyond containment," Kane reported, his professional demeanor strained by the realization that they'd been outmaneuvered on every level. "Someone just dumped our entire operational history to DARPA's internal investigation unit. They're matching our equipment signatures to stolen military prototypes." Kincaid's phone buzzed with increasingly desperate messages from his board of directors. Western Frontier Holdings stock was in free fall as news of unauthorized weapons testing leaked to financial markets. Trading algorithms had detected the pattern of exposed shell companies and triggered automatic sell-offs. "Sir, it's worse than we thought." His chief financial officer's voice carried panic. "Every offshore account we used to fund Project Obsidian, they're all being flagged simultaneously by international banking regulators. Someone mapped our entire financial network." Through his high-powered binoculars, Marcus watched the corporate mogul's composure crack. Kincaid had built his power on layers of deniability, on the ability to bury evidence beneath shell companies and classified programs. Now those same layers were becoming evidence against him. "You still don't understand what you're dealing with." Kincaid shouted toward Marcus's position, his voice carrying the desperation of a man watching certainty transform into chaos. "This project has protection at levels you can't imagine. One phone call and I can have presidential orders shutting down any investigation." But his phone calls went unanswered now. Rachel's carefully timed information releases had ensured that no one in Washington wanted to be connected to Project Obsidian. The very political influence Kincaid had relied upon was evaporating as evidence of unauthorized weapons testing became public. "Sir, we've got congressional oversight committees mobilizing," Kane reported grimly. "Someone connected our equipment. Signatures to that classified facility breach in Nevada. They're treating this as a matter of national security now." Kincaid's personal assistant approached cautiously, holding a tablet displaying multiple news feeds. Every major financial network was running breaking stories about Western Frontier Holdings' connection to unauthorized military technology. The company's market value had dropped by billions in hours. "It's not just the current operation," Kane continued, his tactical assessment brutal in its clarity. "They've documented everything. 20 years of classified programs, covered-up accidents, illegal tests, all verified through multiple sources we can't discredit." Through his surveillance system, Marcus watched as the realization hit Kincaid. In waves, each new alert, each fresh revelation, stripped away another layer of the corporate titan's assumed invulnerability. The man who had thought himself untouchable was discovering the true cost of underestimating a patient enemy. "Our legal team is overwhelmed," Kincaid's general counsel reported through his speakerphone. "Multiple federal agencies are executing search warrants across 3 states. They're finding equipment matching classified military specifications at every site we developed." Kane's security teams maintained their professional discipline, but their movements betrayed growing uncertainty. They were trained to handle physical threats, not the systematic exposure of decades of classified operations. "These readings don't make sense," one of Kane's technicians reported, studying their failing equipment. "The electromagnetic signatures, they're not just broadcasting our frequencies, they're matching them to historical data, proving these are the same systems from the original Project Obsidian." Kincaid's phone buzzed again, this time with an alert that made his face go pale. The Department of Defense had just frozen all contracts with Western Frontier Holdings and its subsidiaries. Decades of carefully cultivated military connections were evaporating in real time. "Someone just connected us to those missing scientists," Kane said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of understanding. "The ones who disappeared after raising ethical concerns about the original project. Their families are being interviewed by federal investigators right now." The corporate titan's carefully maintained facade cracked completely. He had built his power on the assumption that enough money and influence could bury any truth, control any narrative. Now he watched as decades of buried secrets emerged into the light, each revelation triggering another. "Our cybersecurity team is detecting massive data breaches," his IT director reported frantically. "But it's not a hack. Someone's had access to our systems for months, documenting everything. They waited until now to release it all simultaneously." Through his surveillance feeds, Marcus watched as Kincaid began to understand the true scope of his defeat. The corporate mogul had thought himself a master of manipulation, using money and power to bend reality to his will. Now he discovered that a patient enemy had turned his own methods against him. "The market's in free fall," his financial advisor's voice carried panic. "Major investors are dumping our stock. The SEC just announced a formal investigation into securities fraud. They're focusing on the shell companies we used to hide Project Obsidian's funding." Kane's teams started implementing emergency protocols, attempting to contain the damage, but each action only generated more evidence. Their sophisticated equipment, designed to manipulate electromagnetic fields, now broadcast proof of its own classified origins. "Internal Affairs just revoked my security clearance," Kane reported, his professional demeanor finally cracking. "They're reviewing every operation I've handled in the past decade. Someone provided documentation linking our security teams to unauthorized weapons testing." Kincaid's phone lit up with a final alert that made him stagger. "The FBI's public corruption. unit had just opened a formal investigation into Western Frontier Holdings' classified defense contracts. The carefully constructed wall between his corporate empire and military black projects had crumbled completely. "How?" he demanded, his voice barely controlled. "How did they get this level of documentation? These programs were buried under layers of classification. The equipment specifications alone were protected by military encryption. But Marcus had learned from Iron Jack that the most sophisticated security could be defeated by patient observation. 20 years of watching, documenting, and waiting for the perfect moment to reveal everything simultaneously. "Sir, we're detecting multiple federal surveillance platforms," Kane reported, his tactical training recognizing the significance. "Satellites, high-altitude reconnaissance, signals intelligence, we're being monitored by every agency with oversight authority." The corporate Titans world continued to unravel as more revelations emerged. Each shell company exposed, lead investigators to others. Each classified program revealed connected to more unauthorized tests. The very complexity of his operation had become its greatest weakness. "The board is calling an emergency session," his executive assistant reported. "Major shareholders are demanding answers about the weapons testing allegations. Our legal team says we can't contain this. There's too much evidence coming from too many sources." Through his binoculars, Marcus watched as Kincaid faced the ultimate realization. He had lost control, not just of Project Obsidian, but of the narrative itself. No amount of money or influence could stop the cascade of revelations now exposing decades of classified weapons testing on civilian populations. "You can't just expose classified operations without consequences," Kincaid shouted toward Marcus's position, his voice carrying both threat and desperation. "There are powers behind this project that can rewrite reality itself." But his threats rang hollow now. The very powers he had relied upon were scrambling to distance themselves from Project Obsidian. Each attempt to leverage political influence just exposed more connections to unauthorized military technology. The sun dipped lower, casting Kincaid's shadow long across the valley he had tried to claim through deception and force. His helicopter waited to carry him away, but there was nowhere to hide from the truth he had spent decades trying to bury. The corporate titan who had thought himself untouchable was discovering that some forces couldn't be controlled through money and power alone. The truth, carefully documented and strategically revealed, had proven stronger than all his layers of deception. "Sir," Kane's voice cut through Kincaid's spiraling thoughts, "we've got another problem. Someone just accessed our secure archives. In Switzerland, they're releasing documentation of every property acquisition connected to electromagnetic testing. Land records, mineral rights transfers, all of it traced back to classified military programs." Kincaid's personal security detail shifted nervously as federal vehicles began appearing on the valley's access roads. These weren't just local law enforcement or state police. Their markings identified them as part of specialized federal task forces dealing with classified technology theft. "The damage control team can't keep up," his media relations director reported through his earpiece. "Every time we try to deny one allegation, 3 more stories break with documented proof. Reuters just connected us to those mysterious livestock. Deaths in Carson County linked them directly to electromagnetic weapon tests." Through his surveillance system, Marcus watched as another piece of Kincaid's reality crumbled. The corporate titan had built his power on the ability to control information, to shape narratives through careful manipulation of media and evidence. Now he watched helplessly as decades of buried secrets emerged from sources he couldn't silence. "Our technical teams are reporting catastrophic system failures," Kane added grimly. "The equipment's not just malfunctioning, it's broadcasting detailed specifications of its own classified components. Someone built this vulnerability into the Original design. Kincaid's phone lit up with a series of increasingly desperate messages from his legal team. Class action lawsuits were being filed across 3 states, representing families affected by unauthorized weapons testing. The evidence packages provided to their attorneys were comprehensive and irrefutable. The Pentagon's Inspector General just announced a formal investigation. His military liaison reported, voice shaking. They're focusing on how classified technology from cancelled black projects ended up in private hands. Our DoD contracts are being audited back to 1985. Another helicopter appeared over the eastern ridge, this one bearing the markings of a major news network. Live coverage of federal agents securing Project Obsidian sites would make it impossible to maintain the cover story of simple environmental monitoring. Internal audit teams are finding irregularities everywhere, his chief compliance officer added, to the cascade of disasters. Every shell company we use to hide the program's funding, every offshore account, they're all being exposed simultaneously. Someone mapped our entire financial structure. Thunder's Crown's challenging bellow echoed across the valley as more federal vehicles arrived. The bull's territorial display matched the moment perfectly, a simple force of nature standing against those who thought money and power made them unstoppable. They didn't just document the current operation, Kane observed, his tactical assessment cutting to the heart of their disaster. They built a complete historical record, technical specifications, test results, accident reports. Everything we thought was buried under classification and corporate secrecy. Kincaid's executive assistant approached with another tablet, this one displaying international financial news. Banking regulators across multiple countries were freezing accounts connected to Western Frontier Holdings. The sophisticated financial network he'd built to hide Project Obsidian's funding was unraveling globally. So we're detecting unauthorized access to our quantum encryption protocols, one of Kane's technical specialists reported. Someone's using our own security systems to broadcast proof of classified weapons testing. We can't shut it down without admitting control of restricted military technology. The corporate titan watched as decades of careful planning collapsed around him. Each layer of security, each level of deniability, had been transformed into evidence of a massive conspiracy to test classified weapons on unsuspecting civilian populations. The board of directors is convening an emergency session, his corporate secretary announced through his earpiece. Major shareholders are demanding your immediate resignation. Our stock has been suspended from trading pending federal investigation through his surveillance feeds, Marcus observed, as the full weight of realization crushed Kincaid's remaining composure. The man who had bought and buried truth for decades was discovering that some forces couldn't be controlled through corporate power and political influence. All these years, Kane said quietly, studying data from their failing equipment, we thought we were hunting a simple rancher, never realized we were up against someone who learned from Iron Jack himself, someone who spent 20 years building an evidence trail we couldn't bury. Kincaid's phone buzzed one final time, a message that made him physically stagger. The Department of Justice had just announced a multi-agency task force to investigate unauthorized testing of classified electromagnetic weapons on civilian populations. The very government powers he had thought would protect him were now moving to prosecute. The afternoon sun cast harsh shadows across Thunder Ridge Valley as federal agents began securing the remaining equipment sites. Each piece of technology they documented would provide more evidence of classified military origins, more proof of unauthorized weapons testing disguised as corporate development. The corporate titan who had thought himself above the law, beyond the reach of ordinary justice, was discovering that patient truth could overcome even the most powerful deception. His empire, built on layers of corporate secrecy and classified programs, was being dismantled piece by documented piece. Part 11. Complete Unraveling. The evening shadows lengthened across Thunder Ridge Valley as the final act of Kincaid's downfall began to unfold. Federal vehicles continued to arrive, their lights painting the gathering dusk with red and blue patterns. But it was the unmarked black SUVs that drew Marcus's attention, vehicles carrying teams from agencies that officially didn't exist. "We've got specialized units moving in," Rachel reported through their secure channel. "NSA Technical Division, Defense Intelligence Agency, even representatives from DARPA's Oversight Committee. They're treating this as a major breach of classified weapons protocols." Kane's security teams watched helplessly as their perimeter was systematically breached by federal agents with higher clearance levels than their own. The professional operators who had thought themselves the predators were discovering they were merely pawns in a larger game. "Someone's accessing our quantum-encrypted servers," Kane's chief technician reported, his voice carrying disbelief. "They're not just breaking our security, they're using authentication codes from the original Project Obsidian, access protocols that were supposed to be destroyed decades ago." Marcus allowed himself a small smile. His father's legacy included more than just technical specifications. The brilliant scientist had buried back doors throughout the project's architecture, creating vulnerabilities that could be exploited by someone who knew where to look. "Sir, we've got a situation at the corporate headquarters," Kincaid's security chief reported through their compromised communications. "Federal agents just seized our primary servers. They're downloading everything: project files, financial records, operational details." The corporate titan's carefully constructed walls of deniability were crumbling faster than he could shore them up. Each attempt to contain the situation only exposed more connections to classified weapons testing, more evidence of unauthorized military technology. Multiple arrests being made across 3 states, Ruby's network reported through their secure channel. Local law enforcement coordinating with federal task forces. They're picking up everyone connected to Project Obsidian's property acquisitions. Through his surveillance system, Marcus watched as realization dawned on Kane's face. The former Delta Force commander finally understood the true scope of their defeat. This wasn't just about failing to secure Thunder Ridge Valley, it was about the exposure of a decades-long conspiracy. "We've got congressional representatives calling for emergency hearings," Kincaid's political liaison announced frantically. Someone connected Project Obsidian to unauthorized weapons tests in their districts. They're demanding immediate investigations into civilian exposure. The corporate mogul's phone buzzed constantly now, each alert bringing news of another firewall breached, another shell company exposed, another piece of evidence emerging from sources he couldn't control. His empire wasn't just being defeated, it was being systematically dismantled. Technical teams reporting critical failures at all sites, Kane reported grimly. The equipment's not just malfunctioning, it's transmitting its entire operational history, test logs, power signatures, classified specifications, everything we were supposed to keep hidden. Marcus's father had designed this fail-safe specifically for this moment. When faced with shutdown commands, the electromagnetic array would broadcast proof of its own classified origins. Each piece of equipment became evidence against those who had tried to control it. FBI cybercrime units just breached our secure databases in Geneva, Kincaid's financial advisor reported, panic evident in his voice. They're tracking every transaction, every shell company, every hidden account we used to fund the program. The whole financial network is exposed. The sophisticated web of offshore accounts and corporate fronts that had hidden Project Obsidian's funding was unraveling globally. Banking regulators across multiple countries were freezing assets connected to unauthorized weapons testing. We've got media crews setting up along the valley access roads, Ruby reported. National networks running breaking stories about classified Military technology being tested on civilian populations. They're interviewing families affected by the original Project Obsidian. Kincaid watched helplessly as decades of buried secrets emerged into the light. The corporate titan, who had thought himself untouchable, was discovering that no amount of money or influence could stop the truth once it gained momentum. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.